Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is Kidlit Joy and welcome back to my channel. I have recently read a stack of junior and middle fiction books and I thought I would share them with you now. So there are a few books that I will have standalone reviews for, but this stack I'm not doing standalones. I'm just going to include them all in this video and hopefully you find something that you find interesting. I also don't own all of them as physical books. I think there is one ebook in here that I'm going to talk about. So the first book that I want to mention is Kelpie Chaos by Deb Fitzpatrick. This is more of a junior fiction, well, older junior fiction, early middle fiction title. This one is about Ellie, who gets a new pup called Zoom, and Zoom is a Kelpie, and Kelpies are very active. Ellie absolutely adores him, but obviously as Zoom gets older, his habits and his quirks become more and more challenging for Ellie and her family. And when they go out on a family bushwalk with Zoom, Zoom disappears, and obviously this is really distressing for the family. They don't know where he's gone until they find out that maybe he's ended up somewhere where it's actually really useful for him, and he actually ends up on a farm and herding some sheep, and the farmer is the one who brings Zoom back. And the family realize that perhaps there are things that Zoom needs beyond just them, and so they work out ways for Zoom to be able to do things that come naturally to him and also still spend time with the family, which I think is a really wonderful message to send. When you're picking a pet, you need to know exactly what you're getting in for, and you need to know what the needs are for your pet so that it's safe for them and for everyone around them. But this is a really great story. It's one that may end up as a class read this year because it's reasonably short, but it's got a really strong message of family and love for animals and also figuring out problems. Then there is Willodeen by Katherine Applegate, and this is an absolutely wonderful middle grade fantasy book. I loved this one. It was one of my favorite reads. It's from January. It has some of my favorite quotes ever in the book. And this is about 11-year-old Willodeen, who lives in a small town. And this town has a variety of different animals and creatures that live there. There is one particular animal that is really adorable and cute, and once a year migrates to the town and puts on this incredible display that is a tourist attraction for the town. And then there are the screechers, who are animals that are kind of seen as pests. They're a bit smelly, they're a bit loud, and the town doesn't like them. And so people in the town are given provision to hunt the screechers. Willodeen is the first to recognize that by hunting the screechers nearly to extinction, that this actually causes a huge problem for their ecosystem, and that suddenly their beloved creatures start disappearing and the town doesn't know why, but Willodeen has figured it out. And when she is given a handmade gift for her birthday of a little screecher, something happens, a little bit of magic occurs, and suddenly her handmade gift actually becomes real, and Willodeen and her friends are able to investigate what happened to the screechers, why they're so important for the local environment, and maybe how we can bring them back and bring back the town's livelihood through their tourist attraction as well. It's stunning. Like, it's one of the most beautiful kids fantasy books I've read in a long time. I'm kicking myself that I have put off reading it for a long time. This would also make a really, really wonderful class read aloud. There's a lot of environmentalism messages in here, but it's also just a really beautiful human story, and there's a diverse cast of characters, a lot of scenarios that 11-year-old kids who know that they've got something to say but don't know how to get that to the right people. Like, there's a lot of that happens in this book about how to speak up and how to be heard even when people aren't willing to listen to you just because you're young. So really, really great book. Then I read Lightningborn by Julie Kagawa, which is one of the books for the Meet Me in the Middle read along that Ashley from Realm of Kidlit and Comics is hosting over the next couple of months. The theme is Here Be Dragons, so we're reading dragon books. I probably wouldn't have picked up the book if it wasn't for Ashley, and I really enjoyed this one. This is a world where rich people own dragons, and all of these dragons are tagged and tracked, and so there's very few wild dragons out there. In fact, people haven't seen them for the longest time. There is a young boy called Remy who lives kind of on the outskirts of the known world, and he finds a baby dragon and he tries to hide it and tries to keep it secret because this dragon doesn't have a mark. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's a wild dragon. And this causes havoc because there is someone hunting the wild dragon. They come to the town and they start trashing the town because they're trying to find it. When the dragon is taken, Remy and a band of unlikely people need to team up together to try and get their dragon back. And it is just a really wonderful fantasy adventure story. Obviously it's the first book in a series, so there's more to the story. I may get to continue the series this year, we'll see, but it was a really great introduction and there was a lot of world building that went on, but I had a really great time with it. Then I read The Unstoppable Flying Flanagan by Felice, which is a historical middle grade story set in Australia during World War II. And we're following Maggie Flanagan, who is a young girl who lives in Australia. The war is on. Everyone is terrified that Australia is going to be bombed. She's also worried about her brother, who is also off at war. The story is set against the women's movement and also the rise of women's football in Australia, because Maggie is a mad football fan. And so when the school decides to run a fundraiser to raise money for the troops, Maggie wants to run an all-women's football game because the football season has been cancelled because all of their football players have been sent off to war. At first, no one believes that she can do it. She gets into a lot of trouble for even suggesting it, but there are a small band of women who group together to bring this football game to life. And it's based on the history of the rise of women's football in Australia that Felice Arena learnt about and incorporated some aspects into the story. And it was a really interesting book to read. I'm not a football person by any means, but just to hear a little bit about that history and to know that even in the mid-1940s that this was a thing is amazing. So that would be a really interesting book, I think, to read in a classroom, particularly if you're looking at history, but also looking at how you can engage kids who are sports mad. I also read Dragons in a Bag by Zetta Elliott. Again, this is for the Meet Me in the Middle book club. And this one is about Jackson, who ends up having to spend the day with an old woman called Ma. His mother is off to save their apartment and he's been left on his own. And when he's in Ma's apartment, he accidentally stumbles upon the fact that she has some dragon eggs in her apartment and that she is someone who is tasked with returning them to their rightful realm. And so this involves a little bit of time travel and parallel world travel. It looks at friendship and belief and responsibility. And, you know, there's a few rules that Jackson is given about the dragons, including don't let them out of the bag, and whatever you do, don't give them anything sweet. This is the first book in the setup for the series, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Again, this would make a really great class novel. Great cast of characters, really great writing style. Highly recommend. I also read Starfish by Lisa Fipps, which is a middle grade verse novel. This one deals with some quite heavy topics as our main character has a larger body type and her mother is constantly on her about her weight. So there's a lot of body shaming. There are a lot of really horrific things that are said to our main character throughout the book. She's constantly trying to overcome that. She likes her body. She figures out the best way to dress her body throughout the book, and she is trying to push back against all the messaging that her mother is giving her. And she reluctantly starts going to therapy. Her mother thinks that the therapy is going to fix her and help her to realize that she needs to lose weight. Through the therapy, our main character is forced to confront a lot of the feelings, and she begins to reveal things which, when her father finds out, he absolutely breaks down. The extent to which her mother goes to try and force her to fit a perfect, beautiful, acceptable body type is just horrific. So be mindful of that. That's not going to be the book for everyone because it does deal with that in quite a lot of detail. It is a very powerful story. I think it is a very relevant story, and I think it's a great way to talk about how we tackle and challenge fat shaming culture, particularly because just because your body type is larger doesn't mean that you're not healthy, because our main character is a swimmer. She swims just about every day and she's constantly active. Her body type is just different. And I think there is a lot of value in having these books out there so that people can see themselves represented on page and know that what people are saying to you are not okay. Then I read The Dragon's Treasure by Mark Greenwood. This is part of their History Hunter series, and this one is set in 1931 as 4 children find some gold coins on the beach. And essentially what this book does is it looks at the history of shipwrecks off the coast of Western Australia. So it's a really interesting cross between a narrative nonfiction and a history book. So it's perfect for those kids who like to dive into shipwrecks and treasure and how everything has been investigated over time. It's a very short book. It asks a lot of questions, but it also answers many of them. And it was a really interesting read because I didn't know anything about this as part of Australia's history. There's also Jai Goes for Gold, which is part of Kimberly Kicker's series by Carl Merrison and Hakea Hustler with Jai Farrar. This one is also illustrated by Samantha Campbell. And this one looks at Jai Farrar, who is an AFL footballer here in Australia, and he grew up in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, and it's his story growing up and making his way to the AFL. It's a bit of a narrative biography of his life, and it looks at his connection to his Aboriginal culture and how that affects him particularly as he goes through boarding school. But it's also, you know, the connection to community and to family and the encouragement that he has to try out for the major football league here. So really great read. There is also My Place by Sally Morgan. This is her memoir for young readers. It is quite a long book though. Sally Morgan is an Aboriginal writer here in Australia, and she grew up not knowing that she was Aboriginal. Her grandmother and her mother hid it from the children as they were growing up because they didn't want them to be ostracized at school. And when Sally finds out, she becomes really intrigued and interested in knowing more about her culture and about her history. Her grandmother doesn't want to share it though because she has a real distrust of white people, and she doesn't know what will happen if Sally records this history. But as Sally gets older and becomes an adult and has her own family, she wants to find out more, and so she uses some of the clues that she's had from her grandmother's life to piece together a bit of an idea, and then she goes off in search of people and places where her grandmother might have grown up. It is set in Western Australia, and as Sally finds out more, she's able to record the stories of people who are related to her grandmother's story. It is really wonderful and a really important read. I think it's considered an Australian classic. I hadn't read it, and I was really glad that I finally just did it, because I get really iffy about classics, even if they're kids' classics, but it was a really, really interesting and engaging read, and it does really unpack some of Australia's history with our Aboriginal people as well. And then finally, I read The Wild Robot Protects by Peter Brown. This is the third book in the Wild Robot series. When I'd finished reading it and I was reading Peter Brown's note at the back, he said, you know, he never expected to write this book. There was no plans to write a third book in the series, but this one came about, and it was a really wonderful read. So we have Roz, who is our robot, who lives on an island, and she talks to the animals there, and she's part of their community. She has a son, Brightbill, who is a goose, and their island is warned of a poison tide that is coming along the coast. And when it arrives, it changes their island community dramatically. A lot of the animals have to leave because there's not enough fresh water, and the animals that can't leave are forced to work together to create new environments where everyone needs to share, but that's not always the easiest thing for them to do, until Roz finally works up the courage to go in search of the ancient shark, I think is the name, and that is a shark who supposedly knows everything that goes on and might know a little bit more about the poison tide. And this means that Roz has to make a really long trek underwater to find the ancient shark. And when she does, she finds out that the poison tide has to do with a mining operation that is happening off the coast of a place. Like we don't get place names here, but you can kind of guess where things are. Roz then sets off, and she is determined to convince the humans there that they are having a negative ecological impact on the environment, that their mining operation is leaking poisons into the water. And at first they don't believe her. It's not until all of the ocean animals band together to start attacking the station that the humans begin to take the threat seriously. So it is a really interesting read. Obviously touches on environmentalism and the impact of mining on local environments. It's beautifully written, it's beautifully told, the characters are great, and as always there are plenty of illustrations throughout the book. So it is a wonderful series. I'm so glad that I finally caught up on it, because it's been one that I've been meaning to read for a couple of years. And those are the middle fiction books that I have read recently. It's been a really fun opportunity to get through some of those, because some of them are going to go into the classroom as potential read alouds for the class, and I'm going to look at where they fit into what we're teaching. But yeah, I've had a really great time with them, and hopefully you've picked up some recommendations. Otherwise, feel free to have a chat to me about the ones that you've read before down below, or ones that you want to pick up. Or if you have recommendations for books that are similar that you think I might like to read, feel free to leave them down below as well. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.